Welcome to the Stellar Vault. Say hi in the comments to awaken the archive. Then like, subscribe, and let the tale begin.
The weapon discharged a hand's length from Professor Karel Vosh's head, the Sithari xenologist barely having time to flinch before the light filled the world. The sound went through his crest like a blade. White light, the stink of ionized air. Then a human folded backward into the mud, chest open, and did not move again. For half a breath, nothing. The world held still. The gray sky, the rust walls of the settlement, the 40 or so humans who had been crowding the survey team a moment ago, hands everywhere, fast and grinning and rude. Then Coldwater answered. A horn. Low. From the tower. One long note that Vosh felt in his teeth. The humans dropped, not in fear. Down behind oil drums, behind walls, behind the gutted hull of some ancient machine, as if the ground had been mapped for exactly this. One instant they were a crowd. The next, they were gone, and the open yard was a killing floor. Back, Vosh tried to say. Back. This is a mistake. We can correct. A round struck Sentinel Oro in the shoulder and spun him into the dirt. Oro had fired first. Vosh had seen it. The human's hand on the holstered sidearm, Oro's training screaming theft, violation, and the trigger pulled before protocol could catch up. One shot, and now the air was full of metal. Move! Legate Sar shouted. The Sithari commander's crest flared so wide it shook. To the lander. Move! They moved. Minutes ago it had been going well. Professor Vosh would hold to that later when he tried to write it down. The descent had been clean. The settlement was a fortress grown over something older. A pre-collapse weapons depot, his scans had said, half buried under 3 centuries of patch and weld. He had logged it as a curiosity. A primitive people nesting in the bones of their ancestors. Charming. A little sad. The remnants of humanity's ancient civilization had come out to meet the lander. Lean, scarred, wrapped in stitched hide and salvaged plate. Metal in their arms, and metal in their flesh. A crude limb here, a jaw of welded steel there, an eye that glowed dull red. He had cataloged it all with delight. Body augmentation as cultural identity. Wonderful. Then the hands started. They came for the equipment first, the sample cases, the sensor poles, the spare cells. A dozen humans swarming the gear with a speed that was not greed. It was method. Practiced. They stripped a survey drone to its frame in under a minute, parts going down a line that had assembled itself without a single word passing between them. They're taking everything, Oro had said, crest going rigid. They're curious, Vosh had answered. Let them. Trust builds from small exchanges. We give a little. We learn a great... A human reached for Oro's sidearm. To a human, Vosh would understand much later. A tool left within reach was a tool offered, and a tool offered was meant to be taken. To a Sithari, a hand on your weapon was a hand at your throat. Oro fired. That was the whole of it. That was how a peace became a war, in the space between one heartbeat and the next. The lander sat 90 strides across open ground. It might as well have been on another world. Vosh ran. Sar ran beside him, dragging Oro by the good arm, Oro's blood bright and wrong on the gray mud. Survey staff scattered behind. Liaison tail. The 2 technicians, the medic. Rounds cracked the air. Something heavy punched a crater 2 strides to Vosh's left and threw him sideways into the muck. He came up on his knees, ears full of noise, crest ringing. Then a human rose from behind a barricade 9 strides away. Not young, hard-faced, augment-jawed, a long salvaged rifle braced across the wall. The muzzle found Vosh, and held. It did not fire. The human looked at him, looked at the crest flat with terror against his skull, the empty soft hands, the pale robes of a scholar. And in the dull red of that artificial eye, Vosh watched a decision get made. Not mercy, a judgment, cold and quick. This one is no threat. Save the round. The human swung the rifle off him and shot a technician through the throat. Vosh scrambled up and ran, and the not firing stayed with him longer than the shot did, because it was the more frightening of the two. The settlement fought the way nothing in his training had prepared him for. The Sithari knew war as doctrine, lines, formations, the disciplined exchange of fire between forces that announced themselves. The archive called it the natural shape of conflict between thinking beings. Nothing in the archive had prepared him for a battlefield that fought back. A panel in the ground hinged open, and a human came up out of it firing, then dropped back down and was gone, the hatch sealing flush with the mud. A length of cable Vosh had stepped over a moment before, snapped taut, and took a fleeing technician off her feet. Somewhere, a charge went off that had been waiting in a rusted barrel since before the team landed. Buried, patient, command fired, and the technician simply ceased. "Where are their soldiers?" Sar was shouting. "Where is their line? Where is the engagement?" There was no line. There was no engagement. There was only the ground itself turning hostile in every direction at once. A settlement that fought like a wounded animal that had grown teeth in places no animal should have them. A heavy gun woke in the tower. Vosh did not see it so much as feel it. A relic, an old emplaced cannon, throwing a line of fire across the yard that no living thing would cross. It walked its rounds toward the lander in slow, deliberate steps, and the pilot's voice came over the channel, 1 octave too high. This was not the violence of a primitive people. Primitive people did not range their guns. This was the violence of people who had done this many times, against many things, and had kept only what worked. They reached the lander's shadow with 4 of 9. Tail had gone down at the midpoint and not risen. The medic had a wound she was pressing with both hands, and a sound coming out of her that Vosh had no word for and would hear in his sleep for a long time. Sar slammed the ramp control. "Seal it! Seal it now!" Oro slid down the bulkhead, gray-faced, leaking between his fingers. "They were unarmed," he said. "The crowd. They were unarmed, and then they weren't. Where were the weapons? Where were the weapons, Professor?" "Quiet," Sar said. But Vosh had seen it too, and could not unsee it. The weapons had not appeared. The weapons had always been there, under the drums, in the gutted hull, in the hands that had seemed to hold only welding scrap and salvage hooks. The whole yard had been a held breath, and Oro's single shot had let it out. Through the viewport, the settlement worked. That was the word. Work. Not chaos. Humans moving in pairs and threes, low and fast, covering one another with signals he could not read. A tap on a shoulder, 2 fingers raised, a whistle pitched under the gunfire. A people speaking a battle language so worn with use it had gone almost silent. And in the middle of it, under their own tower's fire, 2 humans were dragging the body of the first one Oro had killed back behind the wall. Vosh watched them do it, crawling, fully exposed, risking everything to reclaim a corpse that could no longer be of any use to anyone. "What are they doing?" the medic asked. "Why would they? It's a body. It's over. Why would they go back?" Professor Vosh answered without stopping watching the scene. "Recovering their dead. Under fire? It makes no sense. The risk against the gain is—" "They don't waste anything," Vosh said, still looking attentively to the humans work outside the viewport. "Apparently, that includes the dead." Vosh filed the recovery of the dead human in his report. He did not understand it, but he recorded it carefully, the way he had recorded every strange thing in a long career, because it did not fit, and the things that did not fit were his whole life's work. He just had not yet learned what this one meant. The lander would not lift. The pilot's voice came back thin and stretched. They've got lines across the engine wash, cable, debris, something heavy. If I burn against that, we tip on the climb. Then clear it, Sar said. With what, Commander? I have a survey shuttle. I have no guns. A clang rang off the hull. Then another, steady, rhythmic, almost patient. Vosh pressed to the viewport and saw a human crouched at the landing strut, not attacking it, working it. A cutting torch already lit in one hand, already biting into the strut's outer plate, peeling it back for the alloy underneath. They were salvaging the lander, with the survey team still alive inside it. They think we're finished, the medic said, and the cold of it showed plainly on her face. We stopped being enemies the moment we stopped being a threat. Now we're a wreck. We're a windfall. We're material. Sar stared at her, crest trembling at its full and terrible width. Get us off the ground, he said to the pilot very quietly. I do not care what it costs. The pilot burned anyway. The lander lurched, screamed, tipped hard, and caught itself on a stutter of misfiring thrust that threw every one of them to the deck. Through the viewport, the world spun. Sky, mud, sky, smoke, and the human at the strut let go and dropped clear with an unhurried, almost contemptuous grace, judging to the exact instant the metal stopped being worth dying for, and not 1 moment sooner. Then they were up, climbing, the settlement shrinking below into a smear of rust and smoke, and small, fast figures already walking back out into the yard to gather what the sky had left them. Orbit was silent. Vosh sat with his report open, and the cursor waiting, and his hands not entirely his own. The medic was tending Oro's wound. Sar stood near the forward port, rigid and silent. Outside, Earth turned, gray and brown and patient, a scab of a world that had fallen once and never bothered to rise. He made himself right, because that was the discipline, and the discipline was all he had left. First contact assessment. Subject species. Human. Terran. Preliminary. He wrote what he had seen. Fragmented social structure. Isolated settlements. No central authority observed. Material culture scavenged. Parasitic upon pre-collapse remnants. Reflexive seizure of foreign property without consent. Extreme and disproportionate reactive violence. He wrote that contact protocol had failed in under 4 minutes, that the species appeared constitutionally incapable of the baseline trust diplomacy required, that whatever catastrophe lay in their past had burned out of them the cooperative instinct a civilization needed in order to climb. A failed people, he wrote, a world that fell and stayed down, curiosity advised, diplomacy not advised, caution absolute. He read it back. Every line of it was true. And yet the report felt wrong in a way he could not name. Not the facts. Something behind them. He thought of the human who had swung the rifle off him, the judgment in that red eye. Not panic, not bloodlust. Economy. Save the round. He thought of the 2 who had crawled through their own gunfire for a corpse, the torch already cutting the strut before the engine housings had even cooled. None of it, not one piece of it, was the work of a people who had given up on living. But he had no word for what it was the work of. So he left the assessment as written, because a xenologist reports only what he can see, and he had not yet learned how to see this. He moved to file it. The console chimed, not the report. The long-range array, far out beyond the system's edge, where nothing belonging to the conquered had any business being. Vosh frowned and pulled the data. A signature. Large. Then several, holding formation. A drive wake pattern the archive flagged in red before he had finished reading it. An old flag. A bad one. A flag from the dark edges of Concord space, where the survey maps simply stopped. The Vakul! The cursor still blinked, slow and steady, on the last word he had written. Below him the gray world turned, unhurried and unaware, and far out past the dark, something immeasurably worse than a survey team had finally noticed Earth. Vosh did not file his report. He went to wake Commander Leggett. The countdown for FTL was already running. Around the Sithari ship, space began to shimmer with the familiar distortion that came in the final moments before translation. 3 seconds, the pilot said. 2 seconds. 1. The contact appeared. "Unknown vessel!" someone shouted. The jump field ignited. The Vakul scout fired. For a fraction of a second, both things happened at once. Then the universe came apart. A line of white light crossed the survey vessel from stern to bow. Half the drive section vanished. The jump field collapsed before it could form. Emergency lights flooded the bridge. The ship lurched sideways hard enough to throw Vosh against his console. No challenge, no warning, no demand. The scout never altered course. It continued toward Earth, as though the Sithari Concord vessel had never existed. The bridge filled with damage reports. Half the drive section was gone. FTL was impossible. The ship was bleeding atmosphere from 3 decks and falling into an uncontrolled orbital decay. Emergency systems bought them time. Then the sensors found more contacts. 3 ships the color of old bone emerged from the dark beyond the system and turned toward Earth. With no more ceremony than a clerk opening a ledger, they began to take the planet apart. The first strike turned a hillside village to glass. A beam walked across the settlement in a straight, patient line, and where it passed there was nothing, and the line did not waver for the people under it. Vosh's crest flattened so hard it ached. He had read the archive flag. He had not understood it until now. The Vakul did not hate. Hate would have been warmer than this. They were processing. "They're not even aiming at defenses," Sar said beside him, voice rough. "They're aiming at everything. Equally." "Inventory," Vosh said. The word came out of him from somewhere cold. "They're not conquering. They're clearing stock." Then the Sithari ship's wounded drive finally failed. The deck dropped. The pilot fought it and lost. The gray world came up fast, and the last thing Vosh saw before the impact threw him into the bulkhead was the rust walls of the settlement that had tried to kill him, rushing up to catch him like the only solid thing left in the sky. Professor Vosh woke to a human face. Hard, augment-jawed, one eye dull and living, the other dull and red. Sergeant Brand, Coldwater's war leader. Vosh knew him the way you know a thing from a nightmare. The man who had put a rifle on him and chosen, for reasons of pure economy, not to spend the round. The red eye studied him now with that same cold arithmetic. Vosh lay very still and kept his empty hands where they could be seen. Around them, the inside of Coldwater, concrete worn smooth by centuries of feet, the smell of oil and rust and wood smoke. His crew, Sar, the medic, Oro on a salvaged stretcher, held under the rifles of unhurried humans who did not point their weapons so much as simply have them. A second human spoke from the shadows, older, wire-thin, half his skull plated. Old Hask, Coldwater's keeper of the reckoning. "That's the one," he said. "The soft one. You let him walk." "I let him walk," Brand agreed. The old human circled Vosh with frank appraisal, the way Vosh himself had once circled specimens. "He came down with the ones that fell from the sky. Same colors?" "No," Vosh managed. His translator rendered it flat into the air between them. "Not the same. We are not. We did not bring them. We came to speak with you. The others came too. We saw another settlement get wiped out an hour ago. You're not one of them, but you know who they are. That means you know things we need to know. So until that changes, you're worth more alive than dead." "Hask," Brand said, "a warning." "I know." The Old One stood. "We don't kill what we can use. Boy, get the alien on his feet. He's going to tell us everything his kind knows about the ones doing the burning, and he's going to do it fast." A young human hauled Vosh upright, quick, wiry, barely more than a cub, already carrying a scout's rifle and a soldier's work. "Pike," the others called him. He grinned at Vosh with an awful, fearless cheer. "Walk," Brand said. Vosh walked. They walked him into the bones of Coldwater, and the bones changed everything. He had thought it a fortress grown over a relic. He had been wrong about that the way he had been wrong about all of it. The relic was the point. Beneath the patched walls and the wood smoke, Coldwater opened downward into a pre-collapse weapons depot, intact, maintained, vast, magazine after magazine of ordnance 3 centuries old and oiled like it had been racked yesterday. Humans worked the levels with the unbothered competence of people who had been born to it. A woman test-fitted a salvaged power cell, one of the survey teams, Vosh noted, into a cradle of scavenged wiring, frowning, adjusting, until a dead console woke under her hands. Coil, they called her. She had the alien tech half understood already, by feel, by nerve, by refusing to be impressed. "This isn't a settlement," Vosh said. He could not stop himself. The xenologist surfaced even here. "This is a garrison. You never stood down. 300 years, and you never—" "World ended," Hask said, not slowing. Didn't mean the soldiering had to. He tapped the plate on his skull. "Knew a man who knew a man who knew a man who was here when the lights went out. We don't write much down. Paper rots. Words don't if you say them enough." He gestured at the magazines, the working humans, the boy Pike checking his rifle. "Everything you see, we kept on purpose. We kept it because we always knew something would come." Vosh looked at the order of it. The terrible, deliberate order he had mistaken, the day before, for the scrabbling of savages. There was nothing chaotic here. There never had been. It was simply an order shaped by a world that broke things. Order that bent and salvaged and reformed. An order built to outlast the end of everything. Behind him, Sar was still trying to explain the Concord's position to a human who had already decided it didn't matter. The Concord had a procedure for everything, Vosh thought, and not one of those procedures had ever once imagined a people who survived a fall instead of climbing past it. Every species the Concord had ever met had risen. Their whole science assumed it. Coldwater was the case the instrument could not read. And he had been the instrument. The ground shook. Dust came down from the ceiling in soft gray threads. A runner dropped down through a hatch, breathless. "Walker, East Flat, coming for the gate." Vosh expected debate, a council. The Concord would have convened. The humans simply moved. Brand was already climbing. Hask was already barking 3 words that sent Coil to a console and Pike to the wall. There was no plan announced, because the plan was old, worn smooth, lived in. Vosh, dragged along because no one had decided what else to do with him, came up into gray daylight at the top of the wall and saw the thing coming. A Vakul walker. 4-legged, bone white, taller than the gate, picking its way across the cracked East Flat with the awful, unhurried certainty of all its kind. A machine that had crossed 100 worlds and flattened everyone. "Range," Brand said. 800, Coil called from below. "He's walking the old road." Vosh understood then what was about to happen. and understood it the way you understand a trap only when you are already inside it, watching it close on someone else. The old road, the straight line. The Vakul took the efficient path because efficiency was their whole religion, and the humans had known they would. The humans had known for 300 years that anything coming for that gate would come the easy way. The tower cannon spoke, the relic. The old emplaced gun Vosh had felt tear the yard apart when they arrived. It did not hit the walker. It hit the cracked roadway in front of it. The ground erupted. What looked like an old road was a buried magazine. 3 centuries of patient, waiting ordnance packed beneath the surface and wired for remote detonation. The straight, efficient path the walker had chosen vanished in a wall of fire and earth beneath its feet. The walker stumbled, one leg gone. It came down hard, certainty broken, and for one moment, Vosh saw it, logged it, would never forget it. The Vakul machine simply stopped, as if it could not compute a world that fought back from underneath. That hesitation killed it. Improvised charges went up the flank where Pike and 3 others had been waiting in a culvert the whole time. Salvaged anti-armor rounds punched in through the broken joint. The walker that had crossed 100 worlds died on the east flat of a settlement it had not bothered to take seriously, and the humans were already moving to strip it before the metal cooled. Vosh watched the Vakul die of its own certainty and felt the ground of his entire understanding shift beneath him. The Vakul learned. That was the thing about rigid order. It was not stupid. It was only slow to bend. By the next dawn, the bone-colored ships had stopped sending single walkers down the old road. They came in numbers now, off the roads, scanning for buried ordnance, adapting their straight lines into careful grids. They had taken Coldwater's lesson and turned it into doctrine, the way they turned everything into doctrine. And doctrine, applied with overwhelming force, began to grind. Vosh watched from the wall as the second day became a slaughter that ran both directions. The humans bled the Vakul for every grid square. The Vakul paid and kept coming, and could afford it in a way Coldwater could not. The magazines that had seemed endless were not endless. Coil's miracles came slower. The dead came back over the wall wrapped in salvage cloth, and each one was a debt the settlement could not refinance. Pike fell at the culvert. Vosh saw it. He had gone out again. Too eager, too fast. The fearless cheer that Vosh now understood was the only way a child raised in a dying world could function at all. A Vakul ranging beam caught him as he pulled back. Not a clean hit. The Vakul did not do clean. It took him across the side and put him down in the dirt, and for a moment the fearless grin was just a boy's face, surprised, very young. They got him back over the wall. They did not waste their dead, and they would not start with one still breathing. Vosh found himself beside the stretcher without deciding to be. The wound was mortal. He had cataloged enough biology to know it. The medic knelt opposite him, hands moving with the steady competence of habit, and he saw her recognize it too. The 2 of them, enemies 6 days ago, working over a dying human boy because neither could think of what else to do with their hands. Pike was still conscious. That was the cruelty of the wound. He looked up at Vosh, the alien, the soft one, the useful thing, and the grin tried to come back, and didn't quite. "Hey," Pike said, "you're the one Brand let walk." A breath. Knew he had a reason. Brand always has a reason. "Be still," Vosh said. "Please." "Tell him," Pike said. "Your people. Tell him what we are." The grin finally, faint and terrible. "Tell him we don't waste anything." Then Hask and Brand were there, and they took the boy below, where the dying was done out of the wind, and Vosh was left on the wall with blood on his soft scholar's hands and no word in any language he knew for what he had just been given. The runners went out that night. Vosh did not understand at first. Coldwater was losing. The math was plain. The settlement could not hold another 3 days, and there was nowhere to run that the ships could not glass from orbit. He watched 4 humans slip out the postern into the dark on salvaged motorcycles and stripped-down horses, and he asked Hask, openly, what was the point? "Point," Hask said, "is that you've been making a mistake since the day you fell out of the sky." The old man looked out at the dark, where the runners had gone. "You think this is Coldwater's war? Is it not? Henning Clan's glass now. Tully's 2 valleys over, glass tomorrow. Sooner or later it's everyone's water, everyone's salvage, everyone's ground." Hask's plated skull caught the firelight. "We don't love each other out here, alien. We raid each other. We've killed each other over a working generator. But when the sky starts erasing, everybody equal," he spread his hands, "then the math changes. Then it's cheaper to stand together than to die apart." "How many," Vosh said slowly, "are out there? How many settlements? I logged 1 tribe. I logged you as 1 tribe." Hask laughed, a dry, awful sound. "1 tribe?" He shook his head. "Son, we're everywhere. Every ruin, every valley, every dead city you flew over and called empty. We're all of it." He nodded at the runner's dust, still hanging in the dark. "You'll see, they're already coming." Vosh stood on the wall of a dying garrison and looked out at a broken world he had called failed, and understood that he had counted a single grain and called it the desert. Above, the ships the color of old bone gathered for the final descent. Below, out of every ruin in the dark, the answer was already moving toward Coldwater. And Vosh did not yet have a name for the thing he was watching wake up. He remembered an entry from the Sithari sensor logs, one he had reviewed when they first arrived in the system. The automated classification had struggled to make sense of the scattered human signatures, and, lacking anything better, had assigned them a single label: the Pale Horde. He looked out into the dark and thought of the report he had written, the failed people, the scattered tribes, the world that had fallen and stayed down. For the first time since he had come to Earth, Professor Karel Vosh was afraid of how completely he had misunderstood what he was looking at. The Vakul ships did not glass Coldwater. Vosh understood why before the humans did, because he had spent his life reading the logic of strangers, and the Vakul logic was written across the sky in the one thing they had not done. They had erased the Henning clan from orbit. They had turned a hillside to glass without landing a single soldier. They could do the same to Coldwater, between one breath and the next. They had not. He stood on the wall in the gray dawn and watched the bone-white ground forces assemble on the cracked flats, rank on rank, methodical, patient, an army committing to take by hand what it could have unmade from the sky. And the contradiction resolved itself in his mind, like a lock turning. "They know what's under us," he said. Hask looked at him. "Say it plain." "The depot." Vosh's crest flattened with the cold of it. "Your arsenal. 3 centuries of pre-collapse material, intact and maintained. To them it isn't a fortress. It's stock. Inventory." He gestured at the gathered host. "They glass what has no value and take what does. They will not burn Coldwater, because Coldwater is the prize. They have to come down and take it with their hands, intact, undamaged. Because if they break it," Hask finished slowly, "they lose what they came for." "Their efficiency is a religion," Vosh said, "and it will not let them waste the one thing in this system worth taking." Hask was quiet a long moment. Then he smiled, and it was the worst smile Vosh had ever seen on a living face. "Boy," Hask called. At his age, everyone under 60 was a boy. "Get Brand. And the clan heads." They came up out of the depot and in through the postern, the pale horde, what had answered the runner's call. Vosh had expected an army. He found something stranger and far worse for the Vakul. They were not one people. He saw that at once. A column of riders in stitched red hide who would not stand near a knot of pale scavengers in salvaged plate. A woman with a railgun grown into her arm who spat, deliberately, at the feet of a man whose followers spat back. They wore different marks. They spoke clipped dialects his translator caught only in pieces. They did not like each other. Some of them, plainly, had killed each other's kin. And they had all come anyway. "You hate each other," Vosh said to Hask, watching it. "With everything we've got." Hask leaned on the wall. "Raided the Red Hides twice last winter. They took my sister's grandson." He nodded at the gathering host of enemies turned allies. "Doesn't matter now. Sky's erasing everybody equal. When the math says die apart or stand together," he shrugged, "even people who hate each other can count." Vosh looked at them. A dozen feuding peoples, sharing ammunition they would have killed for a season ago, and understood that this was the thing his sensors had flagged as a single horde. Not a monolith. Worse. A network that could put aside 300 years of blood in a single night because survival had taught them, in the hardest school that existed, exactly what was worth it and exactly what was not. "How?" Vosh asked. "How did you know to keep all this? To be ready? All those centuries, and you never let the knowledge die. Was it prophecy? A warning passed down?" Hask laughed. Dry. "No prophets out here, alien. No warnings." He tapped the plate on his skull. "Just the one lesson the fall taught everybody who lived through it. The universe takes everything you don't defend. Everything. Always." He looked at the white army on the flats. "We never knew you'd come. We just knew something would. Something always does. So you keep the guns oiled, and you teach the children, and you wait." A grim nod. "Turns out we were right." Brand came to Vosh before the assault, which Vosh had not expected. Until then, Coldwater's war leader had been too busy commanding the defense to spare a moment for anything else. "You know how they think," Sergeant Brand said. No greeting. The red augment eye fixed him. "Tell me the truth of it. Not what you hope. What you know." Vosh told him the truth. They cannot improvise. Their whole strength is doctrine, overwhelming force applied through procedure. They will come for the depot in strength, methodically, to take it intact. They will not rush. They will not deviate. They will secure it the correct way because they do not have another way. He paused. If you give ground, they will read it as you breaking. They cannot conceive of a retreat that is also a trap. It is not in their doctrine, so to them it does not exist. Brand was silent, thinking it through. "So we will let them in." "You let them in deep?" Vosh asked, feeling the horror of his own words. "Deep enough to think they have won. Deep enough that they are inside the thing they came to keep whole. And then," Brand looked at him, "then you do the one thing their doctrine says no one would ever do. You destroy the prize rather than lose it." For a long moment, Vosh said nothing. Then he nodded, understanding that the humans were going to pay the price for victory. They gave Coldwater away one wall at a time. Vosh watched it from the deep level, where the non-combatants and the wounded had been pulled back, where he had been put because no one would waste an asset in the open. He watched it on a salvaged screen, Coil's miracle of patched cameras, as the vacuole ground force breached the outer wall and met exactly enough resistance to believe the resistance was real. The humans bled them for it, made them pay for every level, every magazine, every meter of the depot, and then fell back, drawing the White Army down into the bones of the arsenal, into the deep magazines, where 3 centuries of ordnance sat racked and waiting. The vacuole came on methodically, securing each level the correct way, flooding the depot with the certainty of a people who had never in their long history lost a thing they had decided to take. They did not understand that they were not taking the depot. They were filling it. On the screen, Vosh watched the vacuole ranks pour into the lowest magazines, where the prize was richest, where the ordnance was thickest, and he saw the last human fire team pull back through a blast door and seal it, and he understood that everyone still on the wrong side of that door was already dead, and only the vacuole did not know it yet. In the command space, Brand put his hand on an old lever that had not been pulled in 300 years. Coil said quietly, "Whole stockpile goes. All of it. We won't have anything left." "We'll have the planet," Brand said and pulled it. The depot died. Vosh felt it through the rock before he heard it. The entire arsenal of cold water. 3 centuries of kept ordnance, command fired at once, in the deep magazines packed wall to wall, with a vacuole army that could not, in the half-second it had to try, conceive of an enemy that would burn its own treasure to win. On the screen, in the instant before the cameras died, Vosh saw the vacuole realize, not fear. They were not built for fear. He saw something stranger, and to him more terrible. A vast collective hesitation, an entire army's doctrine failing simultaneously. Thousands of minds reaching for the procedure that covered this, and finding, for the first time in their history, that there was none. They had a protocol for every way of winning and every honorable way of losing. They had none at all for an enemy that would rather salt the field than yield it. They were still reaching for it when the fire took them. The ground heaved, dust came down in sheets, and then there was a silence so total that Vosh could hear his own crest trembling against his skull. Coldwater had spent everything it was, and it had held. Pike had been moved deeper into the depot with the other wounded. The wound had never been survivable. Everyone knew it. Pike had simply taken longer to die than anyone expected. When Vosh saw him again, the young scout was pale and smaller somehow, as if the injury had been carrying pieces of him away, a little at a time. Pike's eyes found him. The grin tried to come, and almost made it. "Did it work?" he asked. His hand found Vosh's sleeve. "The depot. Did it?" "It worked," Vosh said. "You won. All of you. It's over." The grin came then, all the way. Fearless to the last, this child who had never once in his short life been allowed to be only a child, this young scout who had done a soldier's work in a dying world because there had never been anyone else to do it. "Good," Pike said. "Good." And then, very quietly, with no drama at all, the way a candle goes out, he stopped. The medic closed his eyes with 2 fingers. Brand, at the edge of the room, the red augment eye fixed on the boy, after a moment said 3 words to the dark. He scouted well. That was all. That was the whole of it. And Vosh, who had come to this world believing it held a failed and broken people, understood at last that he had been looking at the strength the entire time and calling it the wound. They grieved the way they did everything else, carefully, without waste. They spent exactly what the moment was worth, and not 1 drop more, because 300 years of catastrophe had taught them the cost of spending anything carelessly. It was not barbarism. It had never been barbarism. It was what was left when everything else had been burned away. Vosh filed his report from the wreck of the Sithari survey vessel. The ship would never fly again, but enough of it remained. Coyle had spent 2 days crawling through shattered compartments and torn wiring, stripping parts from Vakul machines and forcing them into systems they had never been meant to fit. The terminal in front of him worked because she had decided it would. Somewhere deeper in the wreck, she was doing the same thing to the communications array. She claimed she could make it talk. Vosh believed her. Outside, the Alliance was already breaking apart. The clan heads had their own settlements to rebuild, their own dead to bury, their own stretches of broken world to defend. One by one, they gathered their people and turned for home. The war had made them allies. Peace would make them neighbors again. He opened the assessment he had written in orbit, the one he had never sent. He read it once more. Fragmented. Primitive. Every line still technically true, and every line a lie of the deepest kind, the lie of a xenologist who reports the surface of a thing and believes he has seen its heart. He deleted it. Final contact assessment. Subject species. Human, Terran, he wrote. Then he started over. The message could not be sent yet. Coyle was still rebuilding the transmitter, one stubborn piece at a time. But sooner or later, the signal would leave Earth. If it did not, the Concorde would come looking anyway. Survey teams did not simply vanish, and neither did ships. Either way, someone would arrive. Vosh looked through the fractured viewport at Coldwater, at the scar on the Earth where the depot had burned, at the people already rebuilding among the ruins of their victory. There was still too much he did not understand, and when the day finally arrived to leave, he suspected he would carry more from this world than a report. To his surprise, he knew he would miss it,